She's probably been put in there because, according to Donald Trump, she's a 10.
Ever-empowering feminist, Joy herself, everyone. And this is why, of course, she's on The View and not working for the most powerful man in the world, because Karoline would wipe the floor with you bitter banshees.
The presenters are frantically trying to fix things after Karoline's complete destruction. Did they expect this? Many think so, as the tension between Karoline and The View has been building, and the drama has now reached new heights.
That, and watching this clip, I couldn't help but think how ironic that Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar and the rest of the ladies on The View spend their time calling Republicans the conspiracy theorists. But they have been wrong about everything they have said over the last couple of years. They likened President Trump to Hitler. They have mocked him. They have shamed him. They have lied about him consistently on their show. And it was a joy to watch them on November the 6th when they realized that tens of millions of Americans do not listen to the lies that they have spewed. These women are completely out of touch with reality, and you're right.
If you haven't been following, brace yourself for an intense drama. At the center is Karoline Leavitt, shaking up the political scene. While The View is no stranger to controversy, they really messed up this time. The moment Karoline became Trump's press secretary, the Democrats launched immediate attacks, accusing the show of siding with her and fueling a heated political battle.
Something yesterday that really pissed me off. And that was, she said, there will be no wokeness here.
Oh, yeah.
Let me explain something to you. Because without that wokeness, you might not have that job.
Yeah.
Because women were not invited to that table. Mm-hmm. Women were not invited to many tables in this nation. The reason we fought and busted our behinds to make sure that you didn't have to worry about.
The argument against Karoline was clear, but their smear campaign backfired spectacularly. What began as a subtle attempt to damage her reputation has turned into a full-blown disaster for The View. The hosts are now scrambling to contain the fallout, and spoiler alert, it's not going well. Karoline's bold, no-nonsense approach only amplified the situation. The hosts, who often preach about women's empowerment in the workplace, suddenly became quiet when Karoline took charge. Instead of celebrating her achievements, they reduced her to her looks. Viewers quickly noticed the hypocrisy, calling them out for claiming to support women, while tearing down a young, successful one. The contradiction was so glaring that it practically screamed retaliation. Karoline refused to stay silent, exposing the show as outdated, driven by personal agendas, and trapped in its own hypocrisy. Now, The View is left dealing with the consequences of their own actions.
These women are completely out of touch with reality, and you're right, ABC should...
Let's be honest, Karoline wasn't wrong. But hold on, where does that lead? If Karoline's a 10, then Greg Gutfeld from Fox News delivered the punchline in his signature ruthless style. To put it mildly, Greg didn't hold back, saying some harsh things about Joy. His comments certainly didn't do her any favors.
Behar calls her a 10. I mean, how dare she objectify a woman with a sexist rating system, but it's such a typical thing from a 1 point.
Not only did Karoline criticize Joy, but she also had plenty to say about the Democratic propaganda machine. She boldly stated that Democrats had two choices: either follow the Trump trend or fall behind. Let's be real, once Trump is gone, what scandals will they have left to stay relevant? Without their usual media-driven distractions and endless stories, their supposed power is just an illusion. And The View hosts felt that reality check as the studio fell into an astonished silence. Anyone watching can see that the hosts are angry with Karoline, not because she's wrong, but because she's younger, smarter, and genuinely deserves the spotlight they've been hogging for years. The envy was practically oozing from the screen. Then there's Whoopi Goldberg, attempting to patch things up by playing protective mother. She quickly changed the subject and scolded Karoline for what she called a lack of tolerance for frailty, rather than addressing Joy's glaring hypocrisy.
Something yesterday that really pissed me off. And that was, she said, there will be no wokeness here.
Oh, yeah.
Let me explain something to you. Because without that wokeness, you might not have that job.
Yeah.
Because women were not invited to that table. Mm-hmm. Women were not invited to many tables in this nation. The reason we fought and busted our behinds to make sure that you didn't have to worry about this. And now to hear you talk about it and to hear anybody talk about the wokeness. The wokeness was put in place for a reason.
It's painfully clear that Whoopi Goldberg either doesn't understand the difference or is purposely misleading her audience. If Goldberg is truly such a strong advocate for women's rights, why didn't she call out Joy Behar for reducing Karoline's success to her appearance? Instead of confronting Joy's hypocrisy, Whoopi avoided the issue entirely and took a different, less meaningful approach. Whoopi tried to blur the lines between civil rights and wokeness as though they're the same thing. But Karoline wasn't buying into it for a second, in a now viral moment. It was evident that Whoopi's so-called moral compass was more about advancing her narrative than holding her co-host accountable. The moment Karoline used her first White House press conference to criticize the legacy media for losing touch with ordinary Americans, Whoopi swiftly changed the subject. Instead of addressing the real issue at hand, she deflected with a race card, shifting the conversation from media responsibility to identity politics in an attempt to sidestep the actual problem. Whoopi said, "This is all women because black people couldn't get into colleges because women couldn't get into the colleges they want to go to." She didn't stop there, continuing into full condescending mode by saying that Karoline didn't understand what wokeness meant. According to Whoopi, Karoline only criticizes it because she thinks it's a terrible thing to be. Whoopi then proceeded to assert, "It's not a terrible thing to be, which is why we fought, and that's what we're fighting for, so that you could stand at that podium, so that Karine Jean-Pierre could stand there, so that women of all colors and backgrounds, wherever they came from, whatever their beliefs were, could have the chance to blow that door down. But let's face it, Karoline knows exactly what wokeness is, and that's exactly why she called it out." Whoopi's attempt to mislead the audience into believing Karoline was simply using buzzwords backfired completely. This is clearly backfiring on Whoopi and The View, and the hypocrisy is so glaring it's hard to ignore for those still doubting Karoline Leavitt's qualifications. Let's look at her background. Born in Atkinson, New Hampshire, Karoline grew up in a Roman Catholic household. Her parents ran a used vehicle dealership and an ice cream business in Plato, New Hampshire. She earned a scholarship to St. Anselm College, where she played NCAA Division II softball. During her time at Central Catholic High School, she was already vocal about her conservative beliefs, supporting Trump's policies in her school newspaper, and even starting the first broadcasting club at her university after earning a degree in politics and communications in 2019. Karoline began building an impressive media and political career. While in college, she interned at Fox News, worked at Gannett TV, and spent a summer at the White House Office of Presidential Correspondence. Karoline later returned to the White House as an assistant press secretary under Kayleigh McEnany following Trump's first term and joined Ainsley Earhart's team as a communications director. Her solidified position in conservative politics was cemented by 2022 when she ran for a U.S. House seat in New Hampshire's 1st District. Despite the odds, her audacious Trump-style campaign gained support from political heavyweights like Lauren Boebert, Ted Cruz, and Elise Stefanik, though she lost the general election to Democratic incumbent Chris Pappas. Karoline won the Republican primary. She went on to serve as a national press secretary for Trump's 2024 campaign, where she became known for her aggressive media appearances. In January 2025, Karoline made history by becoming the youngest White House press secretary, winning over Trump supporters with her straightforward attitude in addition to her political work. Karoline credits her Catholic upbringing for her strong pro-life stance and commitment to public service. Despite initially planning maternity leave after giving birth to a son in July 2024, Karoline returned to work early after the attempted assassination of Trump. She's also known for her faith, her understanding of history, and her belief in personal responsibility for those who think she didn't deserve the job. The facts speak for themselves. Karoline worked her way up from a small-town family business to the White House before she was even 30. Whether you agree with her views or not, there's no denying that Karoline is a political force to be reckoned with. In contrast, the hosts of The View have long touted themselves as champions for women's rights, but they don't seem to extend that respect to young conservative women like Karoline. Instead of celebrating her accomplishments, they've undermined her every step of the way. And let's not forget their long-standing hypocrisy. These are the same hosts who claim to be advocates for women's empowerment. Yet they can't seem to respect Karoline's success just because her political views differ from theirs. What's even more frustrating is the apparent lack of self-awareness from the hosts. If they were genuinely committed to empowering women, they wouldn't discredit Karoline based solely on her differing ideas. But instead of having a meaningful debate, they're scrambling to control the narrative. And judging by the shocked silence in the studio, they know they've made a mistake. This isn't just about political differences. It's about the hypocrisy on full display. Karoline has shown more grace and poise under pressure than the hosts of The View have in years. Her calm, confident demeanor contrasts sharply with their frantic attempts to deflect from their own contradictions. The final irony comes when hosts, like Whoopi and Joy, waste their time accusing Republicans of conspiracy theories, while simultaneously indulging in their own wild claims. The recent ridiculous accusations about Elon Musk and assassination attempts are just another example of The View making baseless claims while pretending to be the voice of reason. If the hypocrisy wasn't already off the charts, this latest round of nonsense just cements The View's role as a platform for unfounded accusations and media sensationalism. Ultimately, Karoline Leavitt is more than just a conservative woman. She's an intelligent, accomplished individual who has earned her place at the top, whether you agree with her or not. The fact remains that she's earned the right to be heard, and it's long past time for The View to acknowledge her accomplishments, regardless of their political bias over the past few years. The View and other legacy media outlets have been proven wrong in many of their statements, and it was truly satisfying to watch them on November 6th, when they realized that tens of millions of Americans were no longer buying into the lies they had been pushing. Karoline Leavitt served as a reminder that not long ago, the media and its champions were singing a very different tune. Now, with the desperate need to control the narrative, they will twist anything to fit their agenda. However, Karoline wasn't going to let them get away with it. For years, they compared President Trump to Hitler, ridiculed him, shamed him, and lied about him on their show. The era of unchecked propaganda is drawing to a close, and that reality is The View's worst nightmare. Karoline is young, sharp, and has direct access to the president, something none of The View hosts had. With the power to challenge the mainstream media and their spinning of the truth, The View's entire playbook is beginning to crumble, and they know the hosts of The View have been accustomed to operating without restraint. They pushed whatever narrative suited them, silence opposition, and shape public opinion with no real consequences. But Karoline has completely changed the course of events, spearheading a shakeup in the White House press pool. A new media section was introduced to hold traditional outlets accountable for their years of biased reporting and misinformation about President Trump, and Karoline wasn't afraid to call them out directly. "We ask that all of you in this room hold yourselves to that same standard," she said. "There have been lies pushed by many legacy media outlets about this president and his family, and we will not accept that. We will call you out when we feel your reporting is wrong or there is misinformation." It was a strong statement that struck at the core of the media's credibility. Then she didn't stop. Karoline pointed out that in 2024, while Joe Biden was in the Oval Office or upstairs in residence, egg prices had increased by 65%. The Associated Press and the White House Correspondents Association had historically controlled the room, deciding who got to ask questions and what narratives were pushed. But with Karoline in charge, that was no longer the case. She made it crystal clear that these legacy media outlets wouldn't get to run the show unchecked anymore. Now, 2 front row seats, previously reserved for White House staff, would be allocated to new media voices. Independent journalists who would ask the hard questions and challenge the establishment. In another bold move, Karoline reinstated press passes for 440 journalists whose privileges had been unfairly revoked during the Biden administration. This decision directly challenged the tightly controlled media landscape that mainstream outlets like The View had relied on for years. Karoline's demand for accountability and transparency shook things up. She was sending a clear message. The media can no longer act with impunity. This didn't sit well with the hosts of The View. Whoopi Goldberg went one step further, warning that under this new system, people would just spout stuff, a ridiculous claim given The View's own history of misinformation. Sunny Hostin laughed at the idea that new media voices could be qualified to attend briefings, clinging to the antiquated notion that only legacy media outlets deserved a seat at the table. Karoline's demand for responsibility was a wake-up call for The View and other mainstream outlets, revealing how they had spent years distorting stories, promoting partial truths, and stifling dissenting opinions. It's astounding how hypocritical their reaction was. Whoopi tried to link Karoline's actions to wokeness, talking endlessly about civil rights, women's property ownership, and voting rights, completely irrelevant to the issue at hand. The truth is, wokeness isn't about advocating for equal rights. It's about elevating individuals based on their identities, rather than their merits. The establishment media, fearing that Karoline's actions would upset their status quo, saw this as a direct challenge to their power. For years, they have controlled public opinion and silenced opposition in an effort to maintain their version of events. But with independent media on the rise and millions of Americans turning away from traditional news sources, it's clear that the dispute is more about power than press credentials or journalistic standards. The more the mainstream media panicked, the more obvious it became that they were terrified of losing control. Karoline is holding them accountable in ways they've never seen before, and they don't like it. Let's not forget who Karoline replaced. Before her, it was Karine Jean-Pierre, who was heralded as the first woman of color to hold the position of press secretary, an identity-based qualification, rather than one based on ability. Her tenure was an example of identity politics being used to shield someone from scrutiny. But Karoline Leavitt is different. Her leadership is about results, not about ticking boxes for diversity. Skill speaks louder than labels. Jen Psaki, the press secretary before Jean-Pierre, wasn't impressed by her successor's talking points. which he described as diminishing. But The View is still playing the identity card, hoping no one will notice how flimsy their arguments have become. Karoline isn't playing that game, though. She's here to do the job, and she's doing it exceptionally well in the end. The View isn't just losing the argument, they're losing credibility. For years, they promoted the same tired narratives, using identity politics to protect themselves from criticism. But now that Karoline Leavitt has entered the public eye, their strategies are backfiring spectacularly. The View thought they could get away with another smear campaign, another coordinated attack, and another round of media manipulation. But they weren't prepared for someone like Karoline, someone who refuses to play by their rules instead of crumbling under their hostility. Karoline flipped the script. She didn't apologize or back down. She stood firm, confident, and unshaken. And that's what terrifies The View, because it's not just about Karoline Leavitt. It's about a shift in the media landscape that they can't control. People are waking up. The American public is no longer buying into the manufactured outrage pushed by the legacy media. They're seeing through the hypocrisy, the double standards, and the desperate attempts to control the narrative. The View asterisk isn't used to being challenged. For years, they've attacked conservative women, assuming they would just sit there and take it. But Karoline proved them wrong. She's smart, strategic, and most importantly, she fights back. She does it without resorting to the same divisive tactics the media uses. She didn't need to yell, twist words, or hurl cheap insults. She simply told the truth, and that was enough to send The View into a meltdown now. The response in The View is more justifications and desperate attempts to regain control. But what remains of their audience is starting to wonder, how can a show that consistently preaches supporting women tear down a young, accomplished woman just because she doesn't fit their mold? How can they claim to stand for female empowerment while attacking a woman who earned her success? Their attempts to regain control are too late. The reason for this is simple. They have never truly cared about the empowerment of women. They only care about women who share their views. If you dare to think differently, you become a target for their attacks. But Karoline is exposing the double standards for all to see, not just on The View, but in the media as a whole. This isn't just about one viral moment. It's about a revolution in the media landscape. People are tired of the lies, the smear tactics, and the blatant hypocrisy. They're finally pushing back. For years, the legacy media has set the rules, dictated the conversation, and manipulated the headlines. But those days are coming to an end. The real voices of America, the ones who refuse to be silenced, are getting louder the more the mainstream media tries to silence voices like Karoline's. The more they prove that they're afraid of the truth. This fight is far from over. So what do you think? Are we witnessing the downfall of mainstream media, or will they manage to claw their way back? Drop your thoughts in comments below. And if you want more hard-hitting breakdowns like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Trust me, this fight is just getting started.